there's been an explosion in interest in traditional forms of religion, particularly among young people, particularly among young men. I want to go through this article a little bit briefly because there's some really just stunning trends in here that I don't think anybody was expecting in 2019.
Yeah.
First point here is that Christianity is actually starting to make a bit of a slight comeback. For decades.
In the U.S. and other Western countries, which is important to mention.
For decades, the number of people who identified as Christians had been on the decline year after year after year, and the number of atheists and agnostics had been rising. Well, that has plateaued at this point. And in some cases, the number of agnostics has actually started to drop, and the number of Christians has either flatlined, finally, or in some cases actually started to rise. And what's interesting, again, is where they've started to rise. The United States has no significant tradition of orthodoxy, right? That's an Eastern European tradition. And you're seeing this pop up in the U.S. now. And obviously, we do have a bit of a Catholic tradition, although the United States has largely been a Protestant country for most of its history. But it's also the Catholic Church that's growing as well. So it's the two major hierarchical, more ancient traditional structures within Christianity that, one of them kind of has a history in the U.S. and the other one has almost no history in the U.S. And they're the ones that are seeing a large number of converts. But what's also interesting is what's happening with the Zoomers compared to other prior generations. So, for example, I just want to go through some of this here, is that we've seen a plateau of non-religion in America. But what's also more interesting is the generational divide here.
Yeah.
So, again, each generation's been less Christian than the one before until you get to the Zoomers. Once you get to the Zoomers, you end up finding something really interesting. Gen Z is more likely to attend weekly services than boomers or millennials. Yeah. That is astonishing. Gen Z men show up more than their older brothers who are millennials.
Yeah.
And again, and even compared to some Gen Xers, like that's a total reversal. Now, I'm not saying that we're getting back to the early 1900s where everybody's going to church on Sundays. We're a long ways away from that.
Yeah, sure.
But the fact that you're seeing the youngest crowd in America, that is, by the way, I said boomers. I meant to say Gen X, not boomers. I'm pretty sure that boomers still have the highest religious attendance. But again, for the last 4 generations, you've seen this decline, and Zoomers have started to reverse that. And it's Zoomer men have started to reverse it. So you're seeing a plateauing of the decline of religion. You're seeing a plateauing of the rise of atheists and agnostics. You're seeing a return to traditional hierarchical forms of Christianity in the U.S. and in the West. And you're seeing a rise in religious attendance among Zoomers, particularly Zoomer men. So there's like 4 major data points that are all coming together that I would argue there were not many signs that any of those things were taking place just 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So what do you think's going on here?
So this is interesting. When you look at this, within older generations, there's a consistent gender gap among Christians, with women more likely to be religious than men. Part of that, I think, stems from the fact that, as Tina mentioned before, feminism worked its way into the church as well. And you started to see kind of this girl boss version of femininity. Instead of the Proverbs 31 version of femininity, you saw the girl boss version. And that was problematic because it kind of excluded men, right? Men would get lectured at church, women would get uplifted. When in reality, we're all supposed to be, again, held accountable, and it's a process of sanctification, right? So I think that was part of it. The other thing that you saw is within all these Protestant denominations, almost every single Protestant denomination has had a heretical breakoff. And that's confusing to anybody that's on the outside looking in going, well, okay, wait a second. How is it that I can walk into, one Methodist church and they actually teach, from the Bible, and I can walk into another one and they're telling the Sparkle Creed, whatever the heck that is, right? This is confusing to me. So what's not confusing? Catholicism. There's an amazing amount of consistency within Catholicism, regardless of where you go. Now, that's not to say that there's no differences. Talk to a Jesuit, versus a Benedictine, and you're going to get very, very different views on the role of government and society and everything else. So let's not pretend that the Catholics, are simply because they actually embrace the hierarchical structure that they're it's just one version or interpretation.
And you get the same thing within Orthodoxy, which is not nearly as hierarchical as Catholicism in the sense that there's one leader. I mean, there is an ecumenical patriarch, but he's more of kind of a first among equals.
Yeah.
But the difference is that Orthodoxy is very traditional. The liturgy has not changed in over 1,000 years. It's been very consistent there. And there's also a bit of an emphasis. I have a friend that's Orthodox, and and he converted about, I think, 6 or 7 years ago to it. He's from the South, so he grew up in a Baptist environment, but he converted to Orthodoxy, and he pointed out that there's also an emphasis on more, your inner state and your inner character. There's a focus on what they call, a lot of these things are Greek terms, obviously. There's a focus on something that they call theosis. This emphasis on union with God, silence, contemplation, and you kind of miss a lot of that stuff in Protestant. You have the pastor with the skinny jeans and the guitar and worship service and music and stuff like that.
It can be a little all over the place.
Yeah, and within Catholicism and Orthodoxy, like I was in Italy at the start of June, and I missed 2 podcasts. And while I was there, I was in Milan, and I got to go into the largest church in Italy. Fun fact: it's the largest church in Italy because St. Peter's is technically in Vatican City. Yeah. But the Duomo in Milan, it's this gorgeous, like 900-year-old cathedral. I mean, if this was in the U.S., it would be. I mean, it is a landmark in Italy, but it's stunning. And you go in there, and I actually went in there when they were doing a service, and it's so different than Protestant services here in the West, particularly here in the U.S.
Yeah.
And when I was there, I understand that it's not for everybody, but when I was there, I was like, I can see how somebody can walk in there and feel like that the presence of God is in that room, in that moment during that service when they're doing all of the liturgy and all the rituals and the smoke and everything. And again, a lot of Protestants don't want that stuff, right? We had huge issues on that 500 years ago. But I think for a lot of young men in the U.S. that have grown up in a largely Protestant culture that's more flashy in a busy music style instead of solemn rituals.
A lot of Protestant churches took on the form of either a classroom or a concert.
Yeah.
And sometimes both. Whereas Catholicism and Orthodoxy, with the iconology, with the tradition, with the rituals, with everything that they do, is very structured. And I think young men who feel like they've been walking around on quicksand for the last 10 years, especially the last 5, looking for something that seems solid and has stood the test of time is very important. Now, again, as a Protestant, I have questions about some of the things within Catholicism and Orthodoxy. I don't see them as enemies, right? I do see them as brothers and sisters in Christ. But there's some serious questions there, right? There's some serious questions over interpretation and things of that nature. Now, I will say this. I think one of the biggest problems that Protestantism had is that it worked itself into this idea where it wanted to be, quote, seeker friendly. And it wanted to engage with the culture. And look, there's something to be said about talking in ways that are culturally relevant. That makes sense from an evangelical perspective. And I'm not talking about evangelical in the term of, a particular like sect or idea or branch. Yeah. I'm talking about just the process of evangelizing. By the same token, the church is supposed to stand for truth. It's not supposed to water down the truth in order to be more culturally relevant. In fact, the best way to become culturally irrelevant is to demonstrate to the broader culture that you don't actually believe in the stuff that you're saying, or that it's all infinitely malleable in order to just get along with whatever you want or whatever makes you feel good. And so, again, if you're someone that is looking for truth and you're someone that is looking for something that is consistent and has stood the test of time, you are looking at a lot of Protestant denominations going right now and going, well, it's not you guys. You guys surrendered on anything over. There's Christians in other countries dying for their faith right now, and you couldn't even stand up to your local state senator, right? You're weak, and I don't want to be associated with weakness. I don't want to be associated with the people that I perceive as having gotten us into this direction. And look, I've even said this before. Now, I will point out that the 3 people that I always mention, one guy in the 18 Fox course, my neighbor Anthony Brown, my team leader Ryan Nienaber, 3 of the guys that I point to as being the ones that really reintroduced me to taking my faith seriously and having it be like an active component in my life. The reason why those guys had influence with me, because all of them were like men. They were traditional masculine men. Those were people that I could count on in a fight, right? And that impressed me because I didn't want skinny jeans, pastor. That wasn't someone I wanted to aspire to be. Now, what all 3 of those guys did was a couple of things. One, again, they operated as they embraced and incorporated biblical masculinity. They didn't point to themselves as the standard. They pointed to Christ. And they were completely unapologetic about what they believed. That didn't mean they were in your face all the time. It just meant that whenever the rubber met the road, they did the right thing. And so they provided a representation of biblical masculinity that someone like me was looking for. Now, all of them were Protestants, right? So it's not this idea that it has to be this or that. But if we're looking for some base level explanations for why I think there has been this trend of men getting back into their faith, but only wanting to attend churches that are going to take their faith serious. They want something to fight for. They want something to build their life around that is not the quicksand that they've been offered by culture.